All right. I am so excited for this interview with Terry Tucker. You have done so many interesting things, and I know in my introduction I'm going to miss a couple, but you've been a SWAT team hostage negotiator. You've been an NCAA Division I basketball player. You're a cancer survivor. You're an author. You've got some cool things going on. So I would like you to just fill in some of the blanks of the things I've missed, and let's start.
Yeah, when I look at my resume, it's kind of one of those things where I look at it and say, gee, one of these days I got to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up, kind of thing, because I have been fortunate enough to be very diverse in the things that I've done. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. I'm the oldest of three boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall. And as you mentioned, I was an NCAA Division I college basketball player at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. My big claim to fame is that I got to play against Michael Jordan my senior year in college, his freshman year in college. So he wasn't really the Michael Jordan that we know right now. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. So, I was all set to make my mark on the world with my newly obtained business administration degree when I graduated. And, I look back now and realize I didn't know anything about business just because I had a degree. Fortunately, I found that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. Unfortunately, I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as to help my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. I'm sure we'll get into kind of, my jobs in particular, but I guess I'll round it out with my wife and I have been married for almost 30 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
Oh my word. I don't even know where to go from there. That is
Yes.
so much and tremendous. We're on Zoom for this and you can't really tell, but I'm 5'1". So if I were standing next to you, it would look pretty crazy. Oh my word. You said 6'8"?
Yeah. So it's funny because my wife's 5'5". She literally has a stool in every room of the house so that she can, climb up and reach things on the top shelf and stuff like that.
Do you fit on planes?
I don't very well anymore. I mean,
Yeah.
if I get the exit row or the bulkhead, I might, but since I've had my leg amputated, I have not really had the opportunity to fly. It's definitely not something that is comfortable. Let's put it that way. I wouldn't want to
Yeah.
fly to Australia or something like that.
Oh my word. Every time I'm on a plane and I see someone with some height, I always feel guilty because when I'm sitting down, I've got 4 or 5 inches
Right.
between me and the seat ahead of me. And I know you guys just don't. Well, you brought up your leg amputation, so that feels like a seamless way to just go into your cancer journey. If you would be willing to share whatever feels appropriate or relevant, I would love to just start there and we'll just see where we go.
Sure. So it's a rather long, I guess, odyssey, for lack of a better word. It started back in 2012 when I was a girls' high school basketball coach in Texas, and I had a callus break open on the bottom of my foot, right below my third toe. And initially, I didn't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after a few weeks of it not healing, I went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine, and he took an X-ray and he said, "Terry, I think you have a cyst in there, and I can cut it out." And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it, no dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave either one of us concern. But fortunately or unfortunately, he sent it off to pathology to have it looked at. And then 2 weeks later, I received a call from him. And as I mentioned, he was a friend. And the more difficulty he was having explaining to me what was going on, the more frightened I was becoming. Until finally,
Wow.
he just laid it out for me. He said, "Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years. I have never seen the form of cancer that you have. You have a rare form of melanoma that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. And because your cancer is so incredibly rare, he recommended I go to MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston and be treated." And so I did. I had the tumor excised on the bottom of my foot. I had all the lymph nodes in my left groin removed. And then when I healed, my oncologist put me on a weekly injection of a drug called interferon to help keep the disease from coming back. Now, interferon for me was just a horrible, nasty, debilitating drug because the side effects were that I had severe flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having the flu every week for 5 years. And that wasn't a cure. That was, as my oncologist used to say, we're trying to kick the can down the road and buy you more time for additional therapies. So after that 5-year odyssey through interferon, I ended up in the intensive care unit because of the toxicity of the drug with a fever of 108 degrees, which is usually not compatible with being alive. I was fortunate that I had presented at a level 1 trauma center and they were able to stabilize me literally by packing me in ice, to get me to the ICU. So I had to stop taking the interferon, and almost immediately after stopping the drug, the cancer came back in the exact same spot on my foot where it presented 5 years earlier. That necessitated the amputation of my left foot in 2018. Cancer worked its way up my leg into my shin in 2019, 2 more surgeries. And then in 2020, an undiagnosed tumor in my ankle grew large enough that it fractured my tibia, my shin bone. And my only recourse right in the middle of the COVID pandemic was to have my left leg amputated. And I also found out I had tumors in my lungs, which I'm currently being treated for. So I know that sounds like a very dark and ugly journey, and it certainly has been. But I'll say this to conclude. Cancer has made me a better person. And I also believe that you really don't know yourself until you've been tested by some form of adversity.
Yeah, well spoken. We could spend weeks talking about what you just said in the last few minutes. That is intense. And as someone who's had cancer myself, it was a completely different route, but I understand the spaces of fear and of despair, of trying to hold on to your mindset and saying, this isn't who I am. This isn't my identity. I'm more than this. And then, being in these hospital spaces in these gowns that make you feel incredibly vulnerable. All of it is just a huge ordeal. So thank you for being that vulnerable to share that with my audience.
Sure.
I think the place I want to take this is that as someone who is a basketball star, as someone who is involved with SWAT teams, those are all incredibly athletic pursuits, and you develop an athletic identity around those things. Then you have something like an ongoing illness, and of course the amputations and things like that. That has to mess with your mind. And so I'm wanting to know if you will talk about the process you went through and are probably still going through in terms of, how do I view myself? How do I process and remain the man that you know yourself to be despite all these changes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess to go back to when I was first diagnosed, I believe that I went through all the stages that we associate, with grief. When I was told this, it's like, first it was denial. It's like, well, I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. I've eaten right. I've exercised. I don't abuse. I've done everything that we know to do. And then, I got mad. It was like, wait a minute. I've done everything right. How can I possibly have cancer? And then, I have a pretty strong faith. Our daughter was in high school when I found out I had cancer. It was sort of bargaining with God. It's like, look, just let me live long enough so that I can see my daughter graduate from high school. And then you kind of get a little down. You feel, sorry for yourself. And then, at least for me, I got to a point where it was like, this sucks, but I'm going to have to embrace the suck. These are the cards that I've been dealt. I don't like this hand. It's certainly not a winning hand, but I'm going to have to play these cards to the best of my ability. And I had a nurse actually rather recently ask me, what was it like to have your foot amputated and to have your leg amputated? And I told her it certainly hasn't been easy. It's been a little over 2 years since I've had my leg amputated, and I'm still learning to walk again. But what I told her was, cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind, it can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are, Miriam. That's who your audience is. This is just a house or a vessel or whatever you want to call it to house who we really are. So when people get all excited, and I've certainly seen it over these 10 years where, you want to put me on chemotherapy, I'm going to lose my hair. Who cares? It's just hair. That's not who you are. Who you are is your heart, your mind, and your soul. And if you spend more time cultivating those, working on those, improving those, that's who you really are. This is just something to hang out with who you really are.
Oh, again, well spoken. Okay, let's jump into this who you really are space. So, one of the things I have on my 10-year goals is to develop the mindset of an athlete. I am the biggest slug you have ever met on the face of the planet. I mean, I'm always trying to eat more healthy and to exercise, and I live on a little farm, so I do a lot of exercise like that, but it's what I would call like intuitive movement. These animals need to be fed, so you're carrying this here and there, and it's a form of working out with weights, but it is not what actual athletes do. And I gave myself 10 years because I thought, well, this is a big project to shift my mindset that much. But something that I have always admired about athletes is this sense of discipline and this ability to say, the goal that I want down the road, whatever that is, to be a good soccer player or a basketball player or an archer or swimmer or whatever, there are so many tiny sub skills that have to be developed that require this belief that even though what I'm doing right now doesn't make any sense, or I have to do 100,000 iterations of this free throw, I'm going to believe that in the end it's going to matter. That's kind of what I think the mindset of an athlete is. And now you're going to correct me and tell me actually what the mindset of an athlete is.
I guess let me tell you a story that I think will illustrate exactly what this is. And I'm really going to date myself now by telling you this story. So back in 1976, I was 6 years old. There was 16 years old. Sorry. Well, I wish I was 6 years old. 16 years old. There was an Olympic swimmer, U.S. Olympic swimmer by the name of Shirley Babashoff. And she had one of the greatest, very simple, but one of the greatest quotes I ever heard. And this is what she said: winners think about what they want to happen. Losers think about what they don't want to happen. So I think, she was able to say, winners can override their negative minds, their negative brains, and focus on what they want to occur. Whereas losers, they can't do that. They focus on what they don't want to happen. Oh, I hope this person doesn't outswim me, or I hope. No, you got to focus on yourself, and you have to. It's those ugly days when you're in, at least from a basketball player, the thousands of shots you put up every day in the summer that, we always used to say when I coach basketball, great players are made in the off season, great teams are made during the season. So if you want to get good, you can't wait to the season to have that occur. And so there was a basketball coach when I was growing up at Indiana University by the name of Bobby Knight. And one of the guys I played with in high school went to play for him. And under Knight, he won a national championship and then went on to the pros and won a couple NBA championships with the Detroit Pistons. But Knight had a saying that went like this: mental is to physical as 4 is to 1. So here's this great coach teaching elite athletes to use their bodies to be great players on the court. But what he was really saying with that saying or that quote is that your mind or your mindset is 4 times more important than anything your physical body's going to do.
Yeah, I believe that. Every year I choose a word, or I would invite God to give me a word of what that year is to be about. And this year my word is mindset. So I love that you're bringing up these ideas. I think it's everything, because where your mindset goes, then your actions follow, and your actions really determine the life that you have. I'm assuming the basketball player season happened before the hostage negotiator season in your life. And I assume that every leap into a new career is informed by the career previous. And so you're building upon things. Talk to me about the mindsets in your life, what you were taught as a kid and how it played out on the court, and then where it went with this hostage negotiation stuff.
Yeah, I was very lucky. My story is not, I came from a broken home and my dad beat me and all that stuff. I had, my brothers and I had great parents, and it was, I think my mom and dad that sort of made us understand the importance of family, the importance of what a family was. Because, it's me and my two brothers. I have no sisters. Both my brothers and I we were all athletes. We all competed at a very high level. We all competed in college. One brother went on to the professional ranks in basketball. And so, my parents did what I call divide and conquer parenting. So it'd be like, all right, Terry's got a game over here, so dad's going to that. Larry's got to practice over here, so mom's going to that. And we were always going a million miles an hour. But what they taught us was, family was about loving each other, caring about each other, supporting each other. And I remember when my dad was sick and dying of cancer after I graduated from college. I mentioned I spent 3.5 years at home. My youngest brother was in high school at the time. And I remember one night I said to my dad, look, I'm going to skip my brother's basketball game and I'm going to go work out. And my dad's like, no, you're not. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm a man. I have my own job. What do you mean? No, you're not. He said, you don't understand. He's like, you know what? Your brother needs you there. Your brother needs your support. He's going through me dying of cancer. He needs you at the game. And my dad was absolutely right. I was just trying to, puff out my chest and say, look at me. I'm a man. I'm going to do my own thing. But that's not what our parents taught us. Our parents taught us to be there. So that, I learned all that very early on. And so, we cared about each other. We supported each other. And if you look at and you'll sort of understand the backstory here. If you look at my resume, my first two jobs were in business. I mentioned, I started out at Wendy's and then I spent several years as a hospital administrator. And then I made the pivot to law enforcement. And if you understand the backstory, my grandfather was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. So was in Chicago during Prohibition, when alcohol was outlawed in the United States, during the Great Depression, the late 20s into the 30s, and when the gangs, Al Capone and those guys were shooting up the town. And he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. But my dad always remembered the stories my grandmother told of that knock on the door of, Mrs. Tucker, grab your son. My dad was an infant at the time. Come with us. Your husband's been shot. So when I expressed an interest in going into law enforcement, my dad was, oh, absolutely not. You're going to go to college. You're going to major in business. You're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after. But that's what my dad wanted me to do. That wasn't my passion. That wasn't the road I felt I had to travel. So I had a choice. I could say, sorry, Dad, I'm going to go blaze my own trail and go into law enforcement, or out of love and respect for you and the fact that you're dying, I will do what you want me to do and go into business. So I sort of joke, I did what every good son did. I waited till my father passed away, and then I followed my own dreams. So the first two jobs, because that's what my dad wanted me to do. And then after he passed away, it was like, look, I'm not getting any younger. I was a 37-year-old rookie police officer, when I started that. That was the bad news. The good news was I had some life experience. I had been in business. I had worked with different people on different projects and things like that. So I brought something to the table as a police officer. And sometimes people will reach out to me now and say, I'm interested in law enforcement. And they reach out like, what do you suggest? And I always tell them, put down your devices and go out on the street and talk to the homeless guy. And then go up to the penthouse and talk to that guy. Because if you can talk to people, you'll be successful in law enforcement. If you can't, you're going to be very frustrated along that line. When an opening came up on the SWAT team for a negotiator, as you said, I was a Division I basketball player. I'd always wanted to be the best in my life. And SWAT is the best in law enforcement. They get the best training, the best people, the best equipment. And so when there was an opening, it was like, absolutely, I'm going to put in for that. But I was older. I was probably in my early 40s. So I had to do all the physical fitness. I had to do all the shooting. I had to talk to the psychologist, take all the exams, go through all the interviews, and then finally got chosen to be on it, and then realized I don't know a thing about hostage negotiating, and I had to learn all that.
It would have been very interesting to see a movie with like the highlight reel of those years, and to just see the bits and pieces as the person you were continued to evolve and your thinking evolved and your mindset evolved. What would you share with our audience about negotiation that, I'm sure there are certain things that apply specifically to hostage negotiation that might be of interest, but there are other things that would just apply to negotiation, between your spouses or work, or I just would like to hear kind of what you feel are the low-hanging fruits of the negotiation training.
Sure. So a couple of things. If you sort of step back and don't look at it as, a police interaction, but look at it as an interaction amongst two people. And if you think, and what I always used to say is the overarching thing of this entire negotiation is trust. And one of the reasons negotiating was so emotionally and physically exhausting was you had to get down in the mud. You had to get down in the weeds with these people. There was a movie back in the 90s that Samuel L. Jackson starred in called The Negotiator. So any of your audience that saw that movie, people always ask me, is that the way it was? And Samuel L. Jackson was like the Superman of negotiations. Like, no, that's absolutely not the way it really works. The way it works is we have a primary negotiator, somebody that's actually doing the talking. And then we have another negotiator sitting right next to them, listening to everything that's going on. And then we have a group of negotiators who do what I used to call working the crowd. So they're out there trying to glean intelligence or information. Why are we here? What happened? So as the primary, you may get a note from your secondary that says, don't talk about his mother, because the people in the crowd learned that you were there because he had a big fight with his mother and he grabbed a gun and he barricaded himself in the house. Okay, so we'll stay away from his mother. Now, that was great if you had that information, but there was a lot of times where we would just show up and it's like, I have no idea why we're here. So we need to build that trust. And there were many times where we'd be over here for like 2 hours talking about something when the real problem was over here. And we hadn't even gotten to that because we were trying to develop trust. And one of the ways we did that, we developed trust, is we never lied to people. So people would, say to us, look, I'll put the gun down and I'll come out, but you got to promise me I'm not going to go to jail. And we would have to say, well, I'm sorry, when you come out, you are going to go to jail. And then we try to deflect the conversation into something more positive. So developing trust was one thing. The second thing was the importance of listening. And, we always used to get credit for, well, good job, you talked that person out. What we really did is listen that person out. We let them burn off a lot of their emotional energy to the point where, okay, now there's silence. We don't like silence as human beings, but we had to be very good with silence, of using it to our advantage, of not saying anything, not wanting. And you probably thought, how did you ever do that, Terry? Because you can't shut up. But, it's really one of those things where we got good at that, where we would just not say anything. And then the other person would say, oh, gee, this is uncomfortable. So they'd start talking again, burning off more information. But it was listening to understand versus listening to respond. Yeah. And even today, we're screaming at each other today. And if I'm screaming at you, Miriam, and you're screaming at me, we don't understand each other. But if you say something, whether I agree with it or not, and I want to understand, okay, Miriam, you said that, where are you coming from? Help me understand that. Now we're communicating as human beings. And that's what we tried to do as negotiators.
Oh, very, very interesting. I want to pull on the listening thread and ask you, whether you are a spouse or you are a boss, an employer, a neighbor, there are many, many situations where somebody is going to have to listen to somebody else. And listening to listen and understand is significantly different than listening to respond. And we have within us, oh yeah, but there's that space in every human being that wants to be heard. And sometimes they don't even let people finish their sentences before they interrupt. What kind of input or advice would you give to help someone listen to understand?
One of the things we used to do, and what I try to do now is, you say something to me, say it, as a hostage taker or somebody just a barricaded subject, you say something to me. Now, all I'm going to do is parrot that back to you, but I'm going to attach an emotion to it. And, let's say somebody, and that's where there was kind of the nuance. You had to develop trust, you had to attach the right emotion. So if somebody's yelling and screaming and, waving their hands and they are irate, and you attach the emotion of, you seem a little upset, you've totally missed the mark there. And that person's then going to get mad at you. It's like, what do you mean I'm a little upset? Of course I'm furious. You have to get to where they are. And again, that's why I go back to, that's why it's so exhausting, because, you're down in the weeds with them. You're trying to empathize. You're trying to, to make all that work and stuff like that. And that's just incredibly hard and incredibly exhausting in a lot of ways. So, trying to make people understand. And I think you got to be careful, because, sometimes what you say when you're negotiating with somebody can sound accusatory, like, oh, are you accusing me of something? So I always like to try, when I get to that point, use two words. We always talk about, when, why, what, how, and all that kind of stuff. Use these two words, use what and how. If somebody says something to you, it's like, I want to get out of here. Well, how do you want to do that? Now, that puts the ball back in their court, and it makes them start to think about how they're going to come out. Or, they may not even say that, but you may say, how do you see yourself coming out? Now they're helping you get them out, where they're like, wait a minute, I got hostages. No, they don't even realize that they're now helping you get themselves out, because now they'll start thinking about it. Well, this is the way I see it going. Super. That's exactly what I wanted from you. I wanted you to start thinking about how you're going to come out. So use the words what and how with people. And that way it doesn't sound so accusatory, and it puts the ball kind of back in their court and gets them to the point where they're helping you solve the problem.
I like that. I assume at some level, negotiating is similar to coaching or therapy. None of these are the same, but they have overlaps where you're creating this space and this container where the person can be safe long enough to hear their own thoughts. And when they hear their own thoughts, they start saying things like, I don't want to die, or in a therapeutic space, I don't want to lay in bed all day. I want to do something different, or I don't want to wreck my marriage. I want to do X, or I don't want to stay in this job forever. I would like to pursue something else. And it takes a space of being able to have enough presence that you can hold and expand and allow the person to almost hear themselves think. Usually solutions lie within the person if you can help them get quiet enough to access them.
Right.
So,
And that's why, getting them involved in solving their own problems is so much better. I'm getting you to help me get you out, or the hostage out, or whatever, but you're now involved in this. Now we're together in this.
I love it. I'm going to take a little bit of a tangent, change the topic here. I mean, that one, again, we could talk for quite a while on.
Yeah.
But you had mentioned 4 truths that help others lead uncommon and extraordinary life. And you have a book, Sustainable Excellence. I'm assuming that these 4 truths and the book have some overlap. I would love for you to talk about your 4 truths.
Sure. So the 4 truths are things that I have learned over these last 10 years, some of them a little bit longer than that. They're what I call sort of the bedrock of my soul. They're just a good place to build a quality life off of. And I have them right here on my desk. They're 1 sentence each. I have them on a Post-it note, so I see them multiple times during the day, and they constantly get reinforced in my brain. The first one is, you need to control your mind, or your mind is going to control you. The second one is, embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life, and use that pain and difficulty to make you a stronger and more resolute individual. The third one is more of like what I like to call a legacy truth. And it's this: what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. And then the fourth one is, as long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. So I use those truths. They work for me. I mean, I always tell people, if they work for you, then by all means take them and incorporate them in your life. If maybe 1 or 2 resonate with you, take those and maybe develop your own truths around them. I don't purport to have all the answers, but these for me have worked. And like I said, I'm offering to you and your listeners, if they work for you, then by all means, please take them.
Oh, they are amazing. Give me a story, your number one truth, a story that illustrates it or utilizes it.
Yeah, I'll go back to my high school days, because the number one is really kind of the one that, controlling your mind, that I learned early in my life. I had 3 knee surgeries in high school. And I remember when I went back playing basketball after those knee surgeries, my brain was putting all kinds of negative thoughts into my mind. Things like, hey, you're probably a step slower since these operations, and coaches aren't going to be interested in reaching out to you about playing for their college or university. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, I'm still playing at an elite level, and coaches are still reaching out about the possibility of going to school on a scholarship. I realized early on that I had to change the narrative. I had to change the negative and put something positive into that space. Now, the Cleveland Clinic estimate that we have 60 to 70,000 thoughts that pass through our minds every single day, most of which we don't even pay attention to. But if you think about it, your mind can only hold one thought at a time. Why would you want to make that a negative thought? And, I think back to when I was in college, when people would go out, drinking or partying the night before a test, and then they, come into the test and they'd be hungover and, not feeling good. And so, and what did they always say? Oh man, I'm going to blow this test. I'm not going to do well on this. Nobody ever said, yeah, I went out drinking last night, but you know what? I paid attention in class during all the lectures. I'm going to do great on that test. Nobody says that. Everybody goes to the negative. Everybody goes to, yeah, I'm totally going to blow it. Why would you do that to yourself? Especially when you're hungover and you're kind of behind the 8 ball anyway. It's like, why would you say something negative? Find something positive. And so people ask me, how do you go from being a glass half empty person to being a glass half full person? And what I always tell them is, it's not going to happen overnight. You're just not going to go to bed one night and say, tomorrow I'm going to be positive and everything's going to be great. We're human beings. We're going to have negative things, negative thoughts that go into our brain. It doesn't make you a bad person. It's just the way we are. So don't beat yourself up when those negative thoughts happen. Just realize when they happen, okay, there's a negative thought. What are you going to change it to? What positive thing are you going to change it to? And if you do that over time, and Miriam, you probably knows more than I don't know what the time frame is, but over time, your brain will start to expect the positive then. It's like, no, wait a minute, that's negative. No, we're going to change that immediately to something that's better for me, that's something that's good for me. And I remember back when I was in high school, there was a coach. I don't know if this story ever happened, but it certainly sounds interesting. He wanted to improve the free throw shooting percentage of his team. So he split his team in half. And after practice every day, he had one group shoot 50 extra free throws. He had the other group that would sit on the sidelines, sit on the bench, close their eyes, and see themselves shooting those free throws. At the end of the season, he looked at the free throw shooting percentage of the 2 groups, and he found that the group that never shot a free throw but always saw it in their mind had a better shooting percentage than the group that physically shot more free throws. And he thought about it for a while. He's like, well, that's got to be because those players never missed in their mind. They saw themselves, I made it every single time. And Miriam, again, you probably know more about this than I do, but the part of your brain that creates the synapses, that creates the connections when you're shooting free throws is the same part of your brain that lights up when you're thinking about shooting those free throws. So I always tell people, be careful what's in your mind, because we all become what we think. You think about something long enough, eventually your brain's going to make those connections, and that's the way things are going to be.
Yeah. If my kids are listening to this podcast, they're going to say, Mom, did you prep him to say that? Did you pay him to say that stuff? Because I say this sort of stuff all the time. And I think something I would add to that, I mean, without me just going, I'm with you. Yeah, you're preaching to the choir here. So many times people think that those negative thoughts are them instead of separating out, it is a thought. One of the things that I like about mindfulness exercises, meditation exercises, is that they teach you how to stand outside of yourself just enough that you can start seeing those thoughts go by. Oh, that's a negative thought about me. Oh, that's a positive thought about them, or that's a thought about lunch, or that's a thought about, my taxes, whatever. And you start seeing that these thoughts are going on almost a freeway in your brain. I saw this was in some catalog like Signals, and it was a drinking glass. The glass is half full, the glass is half empty. And they said the important thing is that the glass can be refilled. And it's like, well, yeah, you might be a glass is half empty kind of person, but you don't have to stay that way. You get the opportunity to make the choice about what you're filling your glass with. And nobody who has done any of this kind of work would say that it's easy. It actually takes work to not stay on automatic and to be able to sort of look at your thoughts and go, okay, well, what am I actually thinking? And then there's another step of saying, do I want to continue to think that? And then another step of what do I want to think instead? And those can happen in milliseconds. Then while your brain is learning this trick of trying to think something new, it tries to grab the old thought back over and over. However many times you've thought it before, I don't know that this is scientifically exactly how it works, but I was listening to something this morning where they were talking about how every time you participate in a different kind of thinking, you're laying down another layer on your myelin sheath and helping that neuron connectivity happen quicker. And it was stated by a scientist, but I don't have the research to back that up. So I'll just put it down as anecdotal. But I think that so many times people say, well, I tried it, it didn't work. And they just go back to their old ways. And it's like, well, how many years of how many days of how many moments did you have those negative thoughts? It's going to take a lot longer to shift into that other space. But my goodness, is it worth it? Because those people who visualize the free throws, look at how it impacted the performance, for lack of a better word. And isn't that what we all want, to perform at our higher selves or our better selves? Yeah. Okay, so give me a story from number 3. Understanding what you leave behind is what you weave into the hearts of other people. I love even the poeticness of that statement.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that's a legacy truth. I think it's important, regardless of what stage of life we're in, to sort of look at the end game. What are people going to say about you at your funeral? What do you want people to say about you at your funeral? I have friends that still read the obituary page in the newspaper or online for 2 reasons. 1, to keep themselves humble, and 2, to remind themselves that someday somebody's going to be reading their obituary. I remember when I had my leg amputated and I found out I had these tumors in my lungs, I went with my wife to the mortuary and to the church and to the cemetery, and I planned my funeral. I got some brushback from people who were like, planning your funeral, that's kind of defeatist, don't you think? And, I had to remind these people that the last time I checked, we're all going to die. Don't think anybody's working on a cure for life right now. Every one of us is going to die, but not every one of us is really going to live. And I heard a Native American Blackfoot proverb years ago that I absolutely love. And it goes like this: when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. That's what I want. That's what I'm looking for. Don't get me wrong. I'm not looking to hasten my demise in any way, shape, or form. But death isn't nearly as scary for me because I believed I found my purpose on this earth and I lived that purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, I felt like when you finished that, there needed to be a mic drop or something. That's quite a proverb and quite something to think about. My goodness. This is really fun. I'm having a great time with this interview. Very fun.
Good.
Tell me about your book.
Yeah, Sustainable Excellence was a book that was really born out of 2 conversations. One was with the former basketball player that I had coached who moved to Colorado with her fiance. And my wife and I had dinner with the 2 of them one night. And I remember after dinner saying to her, I'm really excited that you're living close and I can watch you find and live your purpose. And she got real quiet for a while. Then she looked at me and she's like, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about, finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth and then living that reason. So that was one conversation. And then I had a young man reach out to me on social media. He was in college and getting ready to graduate. And he said, what do you think are the things I need to learn to not just be successful in my job or in business, but to be successful in life? And I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help others kind of stuff. Not that those aren't important. They are incredibly important. But I wanted to see if maybe I could go deeper with him. So I spent some time. I took some notes. I had these 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas, these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I kind of stepped back and I was like, well, I got a life story that fits underneath that principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates that principle. So literally during the 3-month period after I had my leg amputated and before I started chemotherapy for the tumors in my lungs, while I was healing, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how sustainable excellence, the 10 principles to leading your uncommon and extraordinary life came about.
I assume it's on Amazon.
Pretty much anywhere you can get a book online, you can get sustainable excellence.
Very good. Have you always been a high motivational type person?
Yeah. I have, but I guess what I want people to understand is that, you're looking at me right now. There's no S on my chest. I don't wear a cape. I have down days. I have days where I cry. I have days where I feel sorry for myself. And when I do, I remember a couple stories, and I'll tell them to you real quick. The first one was about a professor back in the 1950s at Johns Hopkins University who did a very simple experiment. He took rats and he put them in a tank of water that were over their head. And he wanted to see how long the average rat could tread water. And the average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just as those rats were getting ready to sink and to drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, let them rest for a while. And then he took the exact same rats and put them back in the exact same tank of water. And the second time around, those rats treaded water on average for 60 hours. So think about that. The first time, 15 minutes. I'm just not going to fail. I started a business, my business failed. I'm going to die. I'm going to drown in this tank of water. The second time around, 60 hours, which said to me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives. We have to believe that maybe not this week, maybe not next month, maybe not even next year. Sometime down the road, our life is going to get better. And the second thing that it taught me was that we can handle, our physical bodies can handle so much more than we ever thought they could. Now, don't get me wrong. I think everybody has a breaking point, but that breaking point is so much farther down the road than we ever thought it would be. My wife works with a young man who was a former Navy SEAL, some of the toughest men in the world. And the SEALs have what they call their 40% rule, which basically says if you're done, if you're at the end of your rope, if you can't go on, you're only at 40% of your maximum. And you still have another 60% left in reserve to give to yourself. So whenever I get into those dark places, and believe me, I do, but when you get into those dark places, realize you have so much more left to give to yourself.
Wow. One of the things that I think is interesting about this particular podcast is I haven't asked you any of the questions I normally ask people, and I'm trying to decide if I want to or not, because I just like where we've gone. And I feel like that to me seems like an appropriate place to call it a good close. People need hope, and you have so much more in you than you think. Before we got on and started recording, we were talking about the various charities that I like to support, and you chose a donation to Mercy Ships. So we will be doing that in your honor. And Mercy Ships helps people who need surgeries off the coast of Africa. They're in Senegal this year, taking care of myofascial surgeries and corrective surgeries to legs. And as someone who formerly could, walk under your own power, I think that has a meaningful space to you.
It does. Thank you for doing that.
Oh, yeah. What a delight. Can I have you come back again?
Sure.
I would love to do another interview.
That'd be great.